Assalamu alaikum. So we are with the part 8 of Ibn Ishaq Ibn Ishaq Sira. Uh, we were on page number 12, so we shall continue. An early critic of poetry, Al-Jamahi, though perhaps rather than one-sided and ill-balanced in his judgment on Ibn Ishaq, makes some observations which cannot fail to carry conviction. He says Muhammad bin Ishaq was one of those who did harm to poetry and corrupted it and passed on all sorts of rubbish. He was one of those learned in the biography of Prophet, and people quoted poems on his authority. He used to excuse himself by saying that he knew nothing about poetry and that he merely passed on what was communicated to him. But there was no excuse, for he wrote down in the Sira poems ascribed to men who had never uttered a line of verse, and of women too. He even went to the length of including poems of AD and Tamaddul. Could he not have asked himself who had handed on these verses for thousands of years when God said he destroyed the first AD and Tahmud and left alone remaining while of AD he said, can you see anything remaining of them? And only God knows AD and Tahmud and those who came after them. Some of these poems are quoted by Tibri. Al-Nadim goes further by suggesting that Ibn Ishaq was party to the fraud. The verses were composed for him, and when he was asked to include them in his book, he did so and brought himself into ill repute with the rhapsodist. Occasionally, Ibn Ishaq says who the authority for the poetry was. Obviously, at this date, criticism of the poetry of the Sira can be based only on historical and perhaps in a lesser degree on literary and stylistic grounds. Some of the poetry dealing with raids and skirmishes, tribal boasting, and elegies seems to come from contemporary sources, and no reasonable person would deny that poetic contest between Meccan and Medinan poets really took place. Everything we know of ancient Arab. Now we are on page 13. Ancient Arab society would require us to look for such effusions. As Howard's pointed out, in pre-Islamic poetry, these poetical contests are frequent, and it might be added that in early Hebrew history, verses are frequently inserted in the narratives and often put into the mouths of the heroes of the hour. Thus, apart from those poems which undoubtedly were called forth by the events they commemorated, poetry was an integral part of covenants, racial conventions, which no writer of history could afford to ignore. Probably, if all the poetry which Ibn Ishaq included in the Sira had reached their standards of excellence which his readers were accustomed to expect, none of these charges were palpably banal. None of these charges would have been leveled against him, sorry. But when he included verses which were palpably banal and were at the same time untrue to circumstances, uninspired and trivial, as many undoubtedly are, the developed aesthetic sense of the Arabs, which is most delicate where poetry is concerned, rejected what he wrote. As Jumbal, sorry, I'll just move. As Al Jumbal, as Al Jamahi said, he brought poetry itself into disrepute by the balderdash he admitted into his otherwise excellent work, and it did not improve matters that much. That was good was mingled with more that was bad. It is more often it is more than likely that Ibn Ishaq himself was conscious that all was not well with his poetry. For the general practice of writers is to put the verse into the narrative at the crucial moment, as Ibn Ishaq at times does, whereas after the prose account of Badr and Uhud, he lumps together a whole collection of verse by various poets. It is as though he were silently saying, "This is what has been handed on to me. I know nothing about poetry, and you must make your own anthology." Even so, whatever his shortcomings were, it is only fair to bear in mind that Ibn Hisham often inserts a note to the effect that the text before him contains lines or words which have not Ibn Ishaq's authority. The subject is one that calls for detailed and careful literary criticism. The history of the cliché, similes, and metaphors needs investigation by a scholar throughout, thoroughly grounded in the poetry of the pre Islamic and Umayyad eras. Until this preliminary work has been successfully accomplished, it would be premature to pass judgment on the poetry of Sira as a whole. So we should stop here and we shall continue in the next part.